If you were to use the word culture, maybe some 20 or 30 years ago, you probably would have been understood as referring to a concert, theater, or the opera. Today, the most common use of the term culture is usually different. Culture is what sets us apart from others. The term is used a lot more in this context today to talk about differences between people. In this learning module, we will talk about the most important definitions of culture. We will learn to differentiate between individual and culture-related influences, and we will deal with the understanding of culture and its most important characteristics. The term culture is used very often in everyday life. Perhaps that is precisely why it is so difficult to understand clearly and extremely complex. One single correct definition of the term is therefore an impossibility. At the beginning of intercultural learning, we always ask the question, what does my culture actually mean? And this question is not easy to answer. Why is that? Perhaps this quote from the ethnologist Nigel Barley can help to answer this question. We don't see them because they are right under our beer belly, and we are used to looking at the world without them. If we notice them at all, we see them as part of the world. The culture of others, however, like the feet under their beer bellies, is obvious and lends itself to unbiased and lengthy research and comparison. Culture is like a pair of glasses that we wear but hardly notice, despite its decisive influence on how we view the world. It seems like a second nature. When people who share a similar culture are together, there are many things that they don't have to think about. How to greet each other, for example. What kinds of conversation or humor is appropriate. These are all naturally and implicitly understood and shared when people share the same cultural background. We could say that our own culture works like a subconscious autopilot. Even if we constantly use our culture to interpret and understand the world and people, even if we need it to give us orientation about how we think and act, it remains largely unconscious for us. To stay with the image of air traffic, it is virtually beneath our radar. Just imagine how difficult our lives would be if we had to think every time about how to greet others, how to express congratulations, how to condole in the event of a bereavement, or even how to address members of the opposite sex, etc., etc. This brings us to the core problem, the normality and the self-evident nature of own culture. If we look at a variety of scientific definitions of culture, what they all have in common is an understanding that culture always deals with everyday life and ways of life, and that it offers an orientation system for our thoughts and for our actions, which is expressed in automated routines. It is also through this orientation system that people do not have to think every time before they do something. Culture includes our ingrained and unconscious routines. Where animals find their orientation more through instinct, we humans use culture to find orientation. These instincts were probably even more pronounced among our ancestors in ancient time, but for modern people, culture provides the map of meaning that makes the things around us understandable. Only through this map of meaning we can literally understand what is happening around us. This map of meanings becomes visible in everyday actions and in our routines, so we can observe those behavioral patterns. Anyone who was taught during their upbringing that it is rude to be unpunctual will automatically apologize if they are late. We humans use our cultural habits, which can be observed at all levels, from the sequence of social actions in greeting someone to the entire complexity of our coexistence. Children learn culture from their parents, families, or from their caregivers. A newborn human being is born into a social reality. During early childhood, this social reality is internalized, and with it implicitly its values, concepts and patterns of interpretation. In this cultural learning process, which is also called enculturation, the individual becomes a social being who can unconsciously read the cultural signs of his environment and react appropriately. Culture or cultural habits are always shared by a particular group of people. As an example, I always like to use my daughter's and her friends' greeting, who said hello to each other in elementary school in a very special way, I think. There was a first touch of the right hand's fist, a finger snap, and a so-called high five, and a finger and a hand wiggle, like woo! Once more, say fist, snip, high five, woo! This form of greeting was of course used exclusively in this circle of friends. Others, especially boys, were exempt. From this example, we can see that culture, like language, is about interaction and exchange, and it is a group phenomenon that shapes a part of our human personality. Through the process of this enculturation, culture becomes ingrained and more than just a second nature, almost a first nature, so to speak, and thus becomes part of ourselves. This is precisely why culture also has the function of creating identity, and identity has a strong emotional impact. When we find ourselves in a new environment that is different from our familiar surroundings, we may feel uncomfortable or feel like we're no longer ourselves. Culture arises as a reaction to the external world, we could say. We humans find common answers to our constantly changing environment. From this follows immediately that cultures can be changed and that culture is dynamic and subject to a constant change. There are two types of forces that result in cultural change. Forces that come from within society and external forces, an example, either loans from other cultures or reactions to the changing environment or community. Especially in an increasingly interconnected world, most cultural innovations occur by adopting behaviors and perspectives from other cultures. But technical innovations such as the invention of the smartphone and messenger services like WhatsApp also have a profound impact on the way we communicate. Culture is often seen simplistically as software, as programming. Our bodies, they provide our hardware. Our culture provides the programming. Programming follows a certain pattern, and so we follow cultural patterns when, for example, as French women, we greet people with a hint of a kiss on the cheeks, or as Japanese, we greet people with a bow. Here we can speak of behavioral patterns, but if a Japanese person perceives a French woman as intrusive after greeting her and she trying to kiss on the Japanese lady's cheeks, the Japanese assessment follows a certain cultural pattern. So finding this French behavior intrusive. So we're talking about a pattern of meaning here. So not just a pattern of behavior, but also a pattern of meaning. So enculturation provides us not only with patterns of behavior, but also with patterns of meaning. To repeat this once more. For related topics to culture, see the videos on models of culture and on identity. On YouTube, I encourage you to leave your remarks in the comment section and to like and to subscribe. Thank you for your valued cooperation and feedback on the seminar and the online learning platforms.